Guys, gotta make a wedding cake today for a customer, so come along and join me. As far as wedding cakes go, this is on the medium side. It's a 6-inch, 9-inch, and 12-inch rounds. And I always use a heating core in any cake pan that's 10-inch and larger. If you don't, by the time that middle gets baked, your sides will be burnt. So always use a heating core for sizes 10 and up. Once baked, I wrap them in saran wrap and refrigerate them overnight. The next morning I get up and I make a batch of buttercream icing. I do have a video on how to make my icing, so check that out. And then I begin leveling and torting all the layers. Torting is where you take a single layer and you cut it in two like I was doing there. I always start with the bottom layer and then I begin filling. She wanted the entire cake to be French vanilla with buttercream filling. Now keep in mind the whole cake to filling ratio when you tort a cake. You don't want to put on a thick layer of filling or that will end up overpowering the cake. Now here I'm going over with some simple syrup to keep everything moist. Once I have the layers stacked, I go around and kind of cut off any little bit of overhang because you want those sides to be nice and straight when you put the icing on, especially for a wedding cake. With this cake, I think I've done close to 300 weddings. Eesh. Okay, the next step is to crumb coat. So I take my buttercream icing, I thin it down with some water, and I start crumb coating. I also made a video on how to crumb coat a cake, so check that out when you get done watching this one. And if you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube will share it with more people and consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it. Once you get the crumb coating done, pop it in the fridge to let it chill while you work on the middle tier. Now I always double board the upper tiers. I do that because it provides a stronger base for the upper tiers, and it also helps me when I go to place my dowels, which you'll see here in a minute. But to get the cake boards the right size, I set the cake on a board, and then I go around and cut it with scissors. Once cut, I use that board as a guide to cut the second board. One board will go under the cake when I'm layering it and filling it, and the other board will go on when I begin to stack the wedding cake up, which you'll see here in just a few minutes. But it's easy. That's how I get the two boards I need, and I do that for both upper tiers. I use a large sturdy pan to build the upper tiers. That way I can, bring them in and out of the fridge and so on, move them around. And then I just repeat all the steps that I did with the bottom tier. I do exactly the same thing with the upper tiers. Once everything is crumb coated, I'll pull the large 12-inch tier back out and start putting the final icing. And I do that using an icing bag and a coupler no tip to apply it. And then I smooth it out with my large spatulas that have been dipped in hot water. I keep going over the cake until I can get it as smooth as I can with the spatulas. And then I start using a Viva paper towel. Viva is the name brand. And I go over it with the fondant smoother, smoothing it out as best I can. And then I repeat that for the upper two tiers. Sometimes as you're smoothing, you will come across a little air pocket. That's where the air has gotten trapped underneath the icing. And you need to get that air out because as it works, it can get really large. I have seen some the size of baseballs where the icing will separate away from the cake. So all you do is you just put a little hole in the icing and then you work that air out. And if you ever do open the fridge and then, look, there's another one, and you see a big pot, you can still always, poke it, get the air out, and then gently put the icing back down. Just a little pro tip there for you. When I put the last of the 3 cakes covered in buttercream back in the fridge, I'll pull the first one back out again. And here I'm using that second board to mark the center of the cake so I know where to put the dowels. And I do that with just a toothpick. And then I get down kind of eye level and I look to see where the icing might be the highest. And that's where I'll put the dowel in and mark it. And then I'll cut it. And then I will use that as a guide to cut all the other dowels. I see people all the time just stick dowels in and then they just cut them even flush with the cake. Well, your cake's not going to be straight. It's liable to lean if you do that. You need to have the dowels all the same size. And I made a video on that, how to properly dowel a cake. So give that a watch when you get done with this one. Anyway, so I cut it and then I usually for 3 tiers, depending upon how heavy I think the upper tiers are, I'll use about 5 or 6 dowels. These are wooden dowels to support. Sometimes I might go as high as 8, but usually I use about 5 or 6. And then I'm going to put some buttercream on to attach that board to. The bride's colors were purple and like a lime green. And no, it wasn't a Halloween wedding. It was in November. I had suggested, using the ribbon. I was hoping she would use the purple with like a smaller lime green ribbon to go on top of the purple ribbon. I thought that way it would not look like so Halloweeny. Look a little more delicate, but she wanted scroll work in lime green, so you'll see that in a few minutes. But each of the tiers will have a purple ribbon, and then I go around using a tip number 5, which is a round tip, and I squeeze out a dot border all the way around. It helps to hold the ribbon to the cake, and it just looks pretty. Oh, and I attach the cake or attach the ribbon to the cake just using a little dab of buttercream. Now it's time to add the middle tier. And because the cake had been chilling in the fridge for a while as I worked on the bottom tier, I'm able to just pick it up because the buttercream gets hard. And I'll set it straight down on top of the second board. And using 2 boards is kind of nice because, when they go to cut, you can you can separate the cake easily without tearing the cake under it up. So as the cake is cold, I immediately dowel. When a cake gets cold, the icing shrinks, and you always want to dowel when the icing is cold. You don't want to do it when it's room temperature because then when it shrinks, when you put it back in the fridge, the dowels will be sticking out of the cake. So always use it with a cold cake. But anyway, I had eyeballed it and cut the dowels, and now I put them in, and now I'm attaching the second board for the top cake with a little bit of buttercream. And as far as the crack goes down at the bottom, because I use 2 boards, there'll be a crack. I go ahead and I fill it full of buttercream just with a round tip. I mean, the ribbon's going to hide it anyway, but I still like to do this. And then I'll smooth it out with my gloved finger, and then I'll attach the ribbon around the cake. So I just go around, kind of make it all smooth. Before I put the ribbon on, this tier is going to have what I call a diamond press. Some people call it a quilting effect, but I don't know, I've always called it a diamond press. You lightly push it into the icing and you'll move it along and you will create that pattern on the cake. It's really pretty. You'll see when I get done here. But there is a process with it, and you've got to make sure that you keep it straight up and down. You don't want it leaning. And sometimes you have to get at the very end, it won't always line up, so you have to be careful with that. Now, once you get it pressed in, I'm using this stitching wheel on just the smooth side, and I go over each of the lines that I had made. That way, here's a close-up. That way it makes it more noticeable because, you know, I only lightly, if you stick that diamond press in too much, it'll rip icing off. So you just lightly do it and then you go over it. I'll go over all the lines one way. And then once I get done, I turn around and I start going over them the other way to make the diamond press look really nice. And then once I get that done, and it is a little time consuming, you know, but each of the points I'm going to attach pearls. So it'll be really pretty when it's done. And here, before I do the pearls, I go ahead and I add the second ribbon. Again, just attaching it with a little bit of buttercream, just at the ends. And then I'll put the dot border again all the way around. These are the colors. Can you see that lime green? This is the cake she wanted. Now, this is a cake I made years and years ago, and it was very popular with the brides. Like I said, I've done over 300 and some weddings, and that one was very popular, but she insisted on green buttercream for the bottom. Now, she loved it. Me, not so much. I'm going to be honest. Let me know what you think. Hate it, like it. Let me know in the comments down below. But here I'm using little edible pearls, and I put them on with tweezers, and I'm just putting them at all the little points where the diamonds meet. And it ends up being really pretty. At least I think so. Now it's time to add the top tier, and again, as it's cold, you know, the buttercream's really cold, I'm able to just pick it up and, you know, set it on top. And I've attached it with a little bit of icing. And then now I'm taking a long dowel and I'm going to drive it right down the center, connecting all three cakes together. That way, when it's in transportation, because I'm not transporting this, the customer is. I've actually retired from the wedding cake end of my business, Lord, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or longer. But occasionally I will have people talk me into doing one. Usually they're, you know, repeat customers who've eaten my cakes because I don't do consultations and I don't do cake tastings. And if they still want me to make their cake, I will, but they're going to have to deliver it. And so as you can see, the top tier is plain, just the ribbon, and then I put her flowers on, and here is the final cake. Leave me a comment and let me know what you think of the cake. Would you be happy with this cake? Thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you all in the next one. Bye-bye.